Good evening, everyone. Hello. Billy. Good evening. We're having a talk this evening on eradicating Japanese knotweed. Tom Zetterstrom is a local conservationist and fine art photographer. In 2011, he received the Arbor Day Foundation's Public Awareness of Trees Award for his Portraits of American Trees photography exhibitions and related programming. In 2013, he received the Ossenbruggen Award for his, quote, tireless efforts to educate and promote positive change regarding trees, plants, and urban forestry. Over the past dozen years, he led invasive management projects for Salisbury's Washenee Park, Housatonic Valley Regional High School's North Campus, and the Wild and Scenic Housatonic Knotweed Control Initiative. He's the 2024 recipient of the Leslie J. Maroff Award from the Connecticut Invasive Plant Working Group for his significant contributions towards the management of invasive plants in Connecticut. I'd like to introduce Tom Zetterstrom.
Thank you, Tom. All right, so I hear the ventilation system. I'm hard of hearing. I have my hearing aids, but when I wear them, I don't project as well. So anybody who has difficulty hearing, please raise your hand and I will be reminded to raise my voice. Apparently we're being picked up on this for the live streaming that has presumably just commenced. So we're on. Knotweed is sprouting in Winston, right at the Welcome to Winston sign on Route 44 opposite Stop and Shop. And I do notice that that patch is getting larger by the year. How did it get there? That's the question we're going to answer tonight. Knotweed, hey, one of the most invasive of invasives, has conquered the planet. It is rated number 2 in terms of invasivity by the Department of Environmental Conservation in New York. The spread is in the Northeast and the Northwest, entirely consuming New England and up into Nova Scotia and Ontario as well, even on the grounds of the state capitol in Hartford, remarkably enough. The reason it's there is because nobody understands the biology of that plant. They don't even know what it is, even though it came out of the back of a Connecticut DOT truck, which is the largest organization planting knotweed throughout the state of Connecticut. We're going to start, we got 2 or 3 chapters. Riparian knotweed and roadside knotweed are the basics. We'll talk about control of management techniques. Okay, so I wish this pointer worked on here, but the ecological effect is what concerns us in the riparian zone. Forms dense thickets, excludes all native vegetation, becomes a monoculture, alters natural ecosystems dramatically, poses a significant threat to riparian areas, survives floods, is scoured and moves downstream to relocate on islands and shorelines once established, persistent. If on the banks of that illustration knotweed grew, none of what goes on in the middle of that illustration would be occurring. The integration of the vegetation on the banks of the river, the birds, the insects, the butterflies, the fish, the larvae, the bats, are all part of a dynamic food web. Terrestrial invertebrates, insects, to streams provide up to half the annual energy for drift-feeding fishes such as salmonids, i.e. trout. And it all occurs in the summer. Doug Ptolemy has measured insect biomass in native areas and invaded areas, specifically knotweed. 96% reduction of insect biomass when lined by knotweed, which is just remarkable. It just tells you that the plant is not integrated with our North American animals, insects, other plants, etc. In terms of salmonids, that's a bad story to imagine a Housatonic river lined with knotweed when it's one of the most renowned trout fisheries in North America. Okay, in 2017, I observed this map from the Housatonic Valley Association and was amazed at how much conservation land existed in our valley, protected from development, but not protected from knotweed. This view of Canaan Mountain and the Housatonic River from Bartholomew's Cobble at the Mass border has looked like this my entire life. This is where I would always put my canoe in, paddle and get my merit badge, and so forth. Further south into Salisbury and Falls Village, still really clean. There's corn in the background. You could call that invasive in a sense. Certainly it's not natural, but it's contained. So in that year, I proposed to the Housatonic River Commission that based on what seemed to be a lower density of knotweed in the Housatonic than in some other rivers that I have observed, why don't we document how much it is and see whether it's within the manageable area. So 12 paddlers, including lots of commission members, surveyed both banks of the 41 miles of the river from the Mass border to New Milford. Took photographs of the knotweed patches, described them, and submitted them to the Housatonic Valley Association mapping department. The map on the right hanging on the wall is what we came up with. There's the Mass border, there's New Milford, and sure enough, it wasn't that bad. As with all invasive management, the map contains the plan. We've demonstrated this at Housatonic Valley Regional High School in an 8-acre parcel that had nothing to do with knotweed. But once we start to see what's there, many of the knotweed patches are on roadsides, but roadsides follow river corridors and cross them, so there's an interaction. And that first section was in from the Mass border down, Canaan on the right, Falls Village below that, Salisbury on the left. Further down, Cornwall on the right, Sherrod on the left. Not too bad. So by the time I was in that canoe and we got to Cornwall Bridge, we found the largest knotweed patch in the whole project. And so, and I used to complain to the selectmen of Cornwall and say, geez, that view of knotweed across right next to the river just seems inappropriate, out of place. Christian Allen sketched that out for us, and there's right behind the buildings the original source of the knotweed that was dumped there 25 years ago in fill that came from Canaan, biologically contaminated with fragments of knotweed. Next to the state capitol, this is probably the most photographed piece of architecture in Connecticut. That's my photograph of it, and that's knotweed in the foreground. And the people who did the management of the little park there, the river park, weed whacked around it because they thought it was pretty. So we need to do more vegetation education. We didn't, or should we say I didn't at least, want Cornwall Covered Bridge to look like the Sheffield Covered Bridge, wrapped in knotweed to the upstream and downstream, looking upstream on both sides of the river, in flower, in fall, in spring, in high water, in flooding water. So we know what's going on there. I brought in the stalks of that knotweed from down at the entrance of town, but this only represents 40% of the plant. The 60% is underground. And on the banks of a river in a situation like that, it's scouring, and those rhizomes and roots are just busting apart, floating downstream, and landing on a little island and establishing themselves there and moving further downstream. That's the ratio of the plant. This happens to be the upper Delaware. And this is another form of mapping that appeals to me. We only did point location. This is actually vegetation clusters. So those are the monocultures where a fisherman who might want to go trout fishing in the Delaware may not have access to it. And it just reveals the full biological potential of the plant is to constantly expand and to exclude everything else. That becomes those monocultures. We developed a second tier of maps beyond this in each town: Canaan, Salisbury, Sharon, Cornwall, New Milford. Sharon has done theirs. Kent still hasn't done their map. And then in these maps, we start to see the patterns of the distribution of knotweed throughout the town. The riparian areas along the river, the swamps and so forth, the town roads, and then the state highways. So in Cornwall, we had less than a dozen knotweed patches on the river, but we had 27 patches on the town roads and 24 on the state roads. How did those get there? In Norfolk, and thank you for the mapping that Becky is doing, starting just coming over the middle of that map, by the way, is the divide in the state. Everything on the right side is flowing into Houstonic, everything on the left side is flowing east. So I'm grateful to be coming over to your side and bringing the Houstonic model with me. Becky and I have yet to sit down and analyze that, but awareness of the location and the identification of the plant allows you to then go to the next step. So that would be control and undoing basically the work that has been done by human vectors, basically trucks. Biological control has been involving the Aphthalera itidoria psyllid that sucks the sap of knotweed and reduces its vigor so it is less invasive. It comes under the balance of what occurs. It's a Japanese insect. They brought the insect over. It hosts only to knotweed, so it doesn't escape to other, corn crops or something. It's been introduced in England and Canada and in the United States. The UMass is working with it up in Amherst. That's what it looks like. Could be our friend. There's a weakened stalk, but it's a work in progress. It's not going to solve our problem in my lifetime. Christian is 50 years younger, may in his lifetime. In the meantime, people are, as we did with Dutch elm disease, we tried everything imaginable to save elms, and now we're trying everything imaginable to kill knotweed. So this is the patch next to the Cornwall Covered Bridge, when they heard that Zetterstrom wanted to have it sprayed, someone went out there and cut it down and covered it with a tarp. But the plant would have nothing to do with that strategy whatsoever in the next. You would have had to have put down rubber roofing, as Bruce Bennett said, with 30-pound boulders on the edge to suppress that. This is a project of the Housatonic Valley Association on the Still River coming into Danbury, I think is in that southern area. I haven't seen it, but they put out a lot of fabric. But you can see even in the foreground, just above my light, there's little plants sticking out there, and you've got to get them all. And you could conceivably suppress knotweed by this method, and then engage in some chemical treatment afterwards to treat the ones that you didn't suppress effectively. But Tom Lautenhauser, who is the regional scientist for Mass Audubon, says, hey, that black plastic has an ecological value of 0. The process that we use doesn't allow that, leave that there for 3 years to kill the knotweed. And it has, during that period, there's no engagement with the environment. There's no ecosystem dynamic. Here's an example on Route 7 in Cornwall, South Stone Wall Farm, I think it's called Hodgkins Farm. And you can see the green foliage is where in probably June the DOT mowed the side of the road. The flowering foliage didn't get mowed. There are a few things we can observe from this. A, if you mow in the spring, your knotweed will be less tall than unmowed, and it won't be blossoming, which is an advantage when we're spraying. Hodgkins decided he didn't want to spray, and he took the weed whacker to it for several years consistently, and he eliminated it. So there is a technique that is advocated in some of the literature. We'll come to that. Let's come back to that question. In other cases, do not mow is the word here, because we want the foliage to display itself so it can be properly sprayed with herbicide. You don't want to, as has happened in some cases, where suddenly the mower coat shows up the week before we're intending to spray. Okay, here's the strategy. Cut it to the ground in May, June, and then again at the end of August. At least 3 times a year for 3 years. And if it's a young enough plant that hasn't established rhizomes that are as big as sweet potatoes, you may have depleted it. Early detection and rapid response is always a better solution. If you have a little patch as big as this table, you could dig it out and you could pull out all the rhizomes if you didn't want to use herbicides. But you would have to be diligent, as diligent as any gardener. There's a certain romance of bringing in goats, but they only eat the above ground vegetation. And like mowing, you would have to have them constantly eating it, and you have to fence them in and do other things. So it's, we sort of got excited about it at Housatonic Valley Regional High School at one point, but animal husbandry is another science. Stem injection with herbicide, glyphosate, 2 to 5 milliliters per stem is an option, and it would occur in August and September at the end of the growing season, similarly to doing the foliar treatment at the end of the growing season. At the Salmon River in Oswego, New York, flowing into the St. Lawrence, which is known for salmon, they realize that knotweed is not good for their salmon stock. So they're injecting on that river because they're working right on the river bank. Not a bad strategy. We did a test with it just using a meat thermometer, and we had a total kill of that cluster. But it was not a patch as big as this room. It was just one plant. Okay, so we do use glyphosate, and we refer to the Nature Conservancy herbicide handbook. We do not use Roundup. The issue there is, in fact, that the formulation of Roundup includes a surfactant, which is the wetting agent, taloamines that are, in combination, considered highly toxic. Certainly you wouldn't use those around water. You might prefer not to use them around your house as well. We use glyphosate, which contains no surfactant, but it's a wetlands-approved formulation. It used to be called Rodeo. Now the primary brand is called Aquaneat. So it can be used in wetland situations, and we use a wetlands-approved surfactant. So that's not a Roundup combination. I'm going to back up to this just to say, strongly adsorbed to soil particles, which prevents it from excessive leaching or from being taken up from the soil by non-target plants. That is one of the very interesting characteristics of glyphosate. It binds to the soil. It doesn't, after a rain, it's not moving down to the water, to the river's edge or something like that. It also has a half-life of average 2 months, so it breaks down through microbial activity in the soil. So we don't particularly feel it is the most toxic substance. It's certainly well, it just describes it as relatively low toxicity to birds, mammals, and fish. And hey, when we use it, we use personal protective equipment, breathing mask, hat, long sleeves, gloves, etc. Nevertheless, glyphosate is killing the soil appeared in the Lakeville Journal about 6 years ago in a commentary by Tony Pio of Sharon, really fine man, a birder, and on the general counsel to the World Health Organization. So people paid attention to that, but he realized that I don't know if he chose that headline or not, but he did follow up by saying, to be perfectly clear, we are not talking about the careful, responsible, safe, effective application of glyphosate by Zetterstrom and others to fight invasives threatening native plants. Now, he understood, hey, you got to, if you're a birder, you need native plants because you need native insects. So, you know, maybe there's a balance here. And I feel so relieved at that. In 2017, the Journal of the National Cancer Institute reviewed a study of 45,000 agricultural workers who use glyphosate. And our state toxicologist said, hey, this study did not show consistent or strong evidence of an association. And those are people who are using it routinely in their job. So we feel pretty good. I mean, that's one of the largest studies that's ever been done on glyphosate, incidentally. So we're back to this situation. So we've kind of gone through, well, what could we do here? We can't really mow that steep slope up behind the building. That would be impossible. We really didn't want to mow down along the edge of the river because we don't want fragments to go into the river. In 2018, Bob Gambino led this effort, working with his assistants and Christian Allen, and the strategy was using a 12-foot orchard ladder to get, you know, you can see those are, if that's a 12-foot orchard ladder, those are 11-foot knotweed plants. And you want to see that you're hitting the target when you're spraying. So I provided that ladder for that project. We worked that lower area along the shoreline, standing on those rocks. This was on September 29th of 2018. So we were shooting into the patch, not over the patch. I guarantee you not one droplet of glyphosate hit the river. It was a clear sunny day and zero wind. It was beautifully executed. So in the upper section behind the building, the brown area is as far as we could reach with the spray gun. So then the following year, Bob Gambino came back and finished that off. That died back. Now, those are dead stalks of knotweed. We saw no reason to remove them. We just let them fall to the ground because they're dead. And then 3 volunteers sprinkled conservation mix, and we reestablished a ground cover there. And it still needs management, which is not really getting it. Really should be weed whacked. It's just a terrible terrain of debris and fill. But you can see how close that is to the river, to the covered bridge and the fishing area. So at least we halted that knotweed patch from extending upstream and downstream. The following spring, April of 19, there's the dead knotweed, and notice the skunk cabbage. So the knotweed is this monoculture above. We didn't know there was skunk cabbage underneath here. We couldn't see a thing. But we sprayed the canopy, but we didn't kill the skunk cabbage. On Earth Day of that year, Art Gingert sowed 4 types of conservation mix, and we liked the Agway standard yellow bag one. You can see there's grass coming up, and there's a little bit of knotweed to the left and some out by the shore, but not bad. There you still see the knotweed, but we're letting it grow up because we would spray it in the fall or in September. And other grasses are coming in, and then by July, August, the native plant stock of seeds that was in there is emerging, to Queen Anne's lace and so forth. And so that then was a pretty smooth transition after 1 year of treatment, excepting for this individual spot treatments. So in 2021, Houstonic Valley Association organized about 24 volunteers to go where knotweed grew, plant a bunch of native plants along the shoreline. So that was, just a 3 years later, and a vigorous occasion and an excellent turnout. And shall we say, the alternative would have been to have the tarping or the black material there, but quite honestly, you can't do that on a riparian area where water levels are coming in, falling, and so forth and so on. So I think we did the most sound ecological strategy, and we prevented the scouring in future years and the relocation of fragments of the plant downstream to establish all the way down to New Milford or all the way down to the Long Island Sound. So knotweed was introduced into England in 1820 and North America around 1860, and I don't know when it was first reported in Litchfield County, but early observance, somebody must have said, where is this plant from? What is this? But by the time I was complaining about it, public awareness, as a photographer, I probably should have been a little more on top of my game, but I was already, good gosh, 70 years old. And, so as you wait, as you delay, the knotweed keeps growing and expanding, and so that exponential growth and then reaching its full biological potential which basically means it owns the land. As Roger Liddell of Sharon Land Trust said, it's the equivalent of development. It reduces ecosystem services to zero. In the idealized world, or the pre-invasive era in which I grew up, looked like that. The Open Space Institute, is Libby here by any chance? No. Has this concept called the resilient landscape. So they're trying to create corridors for transmission of plants and animals under climate change issues. And I asked the question, well, what happens to the resilient landscape under the weight of invasives? They didn't actually have a good answer. I can give you an answer, however. You know, the cattails on the side will disappear. They will become Phragmites or garlic or knotweed. You know, the cedars might be enveloped by bittersweet and so forth and so on. And you know, I don't know, the turtle might not even be able to get through the knotweed patch, etc. So it's my conclusion is that sustainability requires invasive management. Stewardship requires invasive management. Okay, we're switching over to roadside. By the way, pink tape. Every member of every land trust should at least always have a roll of pink tape in your car, and then stick a few lengths of it in your pocket. You're hiking in the woods. You don't have your locker and your buckthorn blaster. But you can flag stuff and come back to it later. On the side of the road, I do it, and I hope that Steve Geddes of Connecticut DOT spots it and thinks, oh yeah, I should spray that. You know, there's one that's a little bigger, maybe two or 3 years. This one was just emerging from contaminated fill. There, he got it early. So he probably used a pint of herbicide and he eliminated it. We used, gosh, I don't remember how much Bob used on that project, hundreds of gallons to kill it. Here's the Connecticut DOT garage in Canaan, and I'm suggesting to them that they not have knotweed growing right next to their gravel, get rid of that stuff, because it's going to send its roots in there, and then a fragment is going to get picked up. Here's the DOT doing their good work after paving. They do not know, and I do not know if they're planting knotweed, but they should know. Here, they obviously did plant it, you know, in conjunction with paving and that little drainage work. Here, they planted it in conjunction with that fencing project, that the yellow stuff is late in the season. Here, they planted it in relation, this is 272 south of Norfolk coming to Torrington. So normally when you can the evidence, the fingerprints are all over these plots. So all of those fragments, stem fragments, root fragments, are also being cultivated in a sense in every town gravel pit or soil storage area. This one happens to be Cornwall. This one happens to be Canaan. That's Goshen. That's Falls Village. And that's where they planted it in Falls Village, not far from our high school. And that has been sprayed and taken care of and resolved. So we thought, okay, these guys are not doing us a lot of favors. Let's have a conference, and we invited the town crews of 7 towns to the Falls Village Firehouse. We got a grant from the Northwest Connecticut Community Foundation to cover lunch. We fed them, which they like. And then Bob Gambino led a demonstration in the field. We had a good turnout. 6 of the 7 towns attended. 1 was paving. We demonstrated wet to glisten, not to drip. These are techniques that are called best management practices. You minimize your use of chemistry, you maximize your effect by doing it at proper timing and proper technique. You don't spray during the blossom period. So if you mow, you can delay the blossom period or even eliminate it, and then you can spray right through August, September. Otherwise, the blossoms come out in mid-August through mid-September. And DOT doesn't spray, Christian doesn't spray, others on our list of invasive plant managers don't spray during that period. Makes sense? There's honeybees on those, foraging on those plants during that period. Here's Route 44 in Salisbury. There's probably a week after foliar treatment. There's a follow-up spot treatment. Steve Geddes is District 4 arborist and applicator. You should remember his name. You should email him and put your pink tapes out and say, hey, Colebrook just put out 7 strips of pink on State Road or New Hartford or whatnot. Could you please get them while they're small? You know, it'll take him a couple of hours. He was very responsive in Norfolk.
Yes.
Just last year,
Yes,
he did
yeah.
that. And Cornwall called him in, and he took care of it pretty fast. But look at what happened later. You know, now, since then, he hasn't kept it up because, you know, there's behind there, way over there, you see some stems still sticking up. And, you know, they're loath to go beyond the right-of-way edge. So therefore, there's encroachment again. This was in 2015. I convinced our selectman, Doug Humes, that we should start treating knotweed. And this is very unprofessional and does not comply with OSHA standards. But listen, I wanted to see where I was spraying. I got that patch thoroughly. And there's Christian checking the number of stems that resprouted, very few. And so there was a succession of a year or two of spot treatment. And by the way, I went in there, and you see the garlic mustard in the lower left. I went in and I picked that stuff. I didn't want to create an opportunity for a next invasive. So you got to think multi-layered. Here we are spraying on the side of the road in Canaan. The circles show the knotweed that we have eliminated. So we are now nearly knotweed free in terms of our town road system. In Falls Village, the same is true. There's the firehouse, and we did, so after our presentation there to the town crews, they said, oh yeah, Tom Sherwood, he's into spraying, he took care of it. And he did a beautiful job. And so they only had about a half a dozen patches in that town, now they have none. So 0 is our new favorite number, by the way. It's even before early recognition. And there's no exponential growth of 0, it's 0. We have other areas along the Blackberry that are severely impacted, and that's a question of worst management practices, which is using weed whacking instead of foliar spray. Cornwall has, as I stated earlier, has reversed their self-assault on their town. They had controlled it. Bob Gambino did the knotweed in their gravel pit. There was a lot of knotweed in that gravel pit. And it's kind of amazing that nobody said, you know, what is this plant? And when we were picking up soil and it's got fragments of it, is this a problem? You know, because we noticed it's on such and such a road. It's the same plant. Mowing on the side of the road, this is Salisbury on the Salmon Kill, would be a bad idea, flail mowing, because you're shooting fragments into the Salmon Kill. After I saw that, I panicked. I thought, oh God, they just planted all the Salmon Kill with knotweed all the way down to the Housatonic. You know, they might have tossed in, who knows, 50 or fragments in there, so we don't, it's an unknown. Here's my paddling on the Housatonic in North Kent. Below the DEP wildlife management area, and they had been doing some cutting on the side of the banks, and apparently, I don't know, tossed them into the river, but I found that lodged in a mud further downstream. You know, I took it out, and I could see it was sliced with a machete, and you see in the background what's growing by that log is knotweed. So this is how it expands. Here's a worst case scenario on the side of the Houstonic in Houstonic, Massachusetts, where the guy, because they don't like spraying in Great Barrington. So the guy who's doing the mowing really is annoyed at this plant. So he just digs his mower into the ground. You know, he's just shaving, dulling his blades and shaving more knotweed off and flailing it into the river. So that's another case of worst case scenario, worst management practices. Great Barrington, gateway to Great Barrington. By the way, your gateway to Welcome to Winston is going to look like that someday. So be aware. They're mowing it in the same way, so it's entirely ineffective. It stimulates lateral growth of the roots and more sprouting. It's counterproductive. Here's someone up in Stockbridge. I gave this talk at the Berkshire Botanical Garden 3 years ago, and he said, "Oh, you should come and look at my knotweed patch." I did. You can see how high the water level had been up there from the mud on it, but he didn't want to spray. And I'm thinking, what a shame, you know, because downstream you have one of the most scenic parts of the river running down to Houstonic. And, you know, that could look like that first shot I had of the Deerfield River in Western Mass, or the upper Houstonic. So we're wrapping up. There are resource materials, and I can send you links to these, but Penn State University has excellent roadside management. Do we have any Board of Selectmen members present, by the way? Oh, good, thank you, thank you. From Winchester? Oh, great. New Hampshire Department of Agriculture has a manual. It's probably 40 pages on best management practices for knotweed control. So there's literature out there. I brought some of these in this envelope, and I'll put it out here on the table. This is a Vermont Nature Conservancy chemical fact sheet, and it should be said, you know, become an informed applicator. You know, you can actually do this on your own land, by the way. If you own the land, you can use herbicides on it. If you had a knotweed patch, you know, you could try pulling it or cutting it repeatedly or spraying it with, we use 2% glyphosate. For larger established patches that have been there for 20 years, you probably increase your percentage to 3 to 7%. And that stuff is described in here. It also describes a dozen other invasive plants and best management practices for that. The project I'm working on at the Sharon Land Trust for the last 2 years has been entirely focused on Oriental bittersweet, the tree-killing vine. And that's described in here. This is the product of the Connecticut Conservation District's invasive plants in your backyard. It's now out of print, but it's available online.
They're updating it.
Invasive Plants in Your Backyard 2020 will bring you, and it's going to be revised and expanded. But what they said about knotweed was dig small plants, removing all shoots, roots, rhizomes. And then they just explained to cut 3 times per year for several years. Chemical control can cut once in May, then wait until August to spray foliage.
How do you get rid of what you're pulling up?
Okay, that's a good question. If you're pulling up live fragments, they recommend do not put it in your compost pile. They recommend putting it in contractor bags and treating it as garbage. Now, if you had a little patch that you could fit in a contractor bag, you could probably get away with that. But if you had a patch as big as this room, they probably would say, no, thank you. But you can If you treat it with herbicide, it's gonna be dead, so the stalks are not a problem. In that Cornwall project, we used the fallen stalks as mulch, basically, as a lattice, and we sowed seeds right through there. They sprinkled through the ground, and then they deteriorated. I have a pile of garlic mustard that's almost as big as a VW bus in the spring. I have a tarp underneath it, and I add to it. It's a project of May before it forms seeds, and then we just cover the tarp over it, and it molds and rots and dissipates. So you can store it in a place where you can observe it, or put it in a bag and let it mold and rot, or put it under a tarp, and just pay attention to it so it doesn't escape and establish. Yeah?
Okay.
So I think we could do Q&A, Thomas. Do you want to be the moderator? Or are you comfortable where you are? So there's a fact sheet that UConn produces as well, which is worth looking at. I don't agree with everything on the back side, but you know, we didn't print out any of those, did we? No. So we could just review the concepts, okay? Riparian and roadside survey, GPS turned on. This is the mapping concept, which is I would highly recommend. By the way, you could just, if you have something in your backyard, sketch it out. So you know the parameters at a certain time. You know, it would be interesting if we had mapped the knotweed at the Welcome to Winston side and knew how many yards it was expanding on an annual basis. Prevention, early detection, always the right answer. Town crews, as far as the Department of Public Works is concerned, really should be managing their storage and fill areas, and that should be maintained knotweed free. It's not a big deal. If they know they're working in a knotweed patch where they're doing excavation, that's contaminated, biologically contaminated fill. That should go in one storage area where they can let it resprout, and then they get a little 1 gallon, 2 gallon canister sprayer, and they spray it down when it resprouts, and they can kill that stuff. And it could be reused later, but it would be just so inappropriate to take it from one site, mix it up with some other good soil, and then take it to the next site, and you know, then you gotta hire someone to spray it. But it should be said, State of Connecticut, DOT, and town crews have the right to use herbicides on their right-of-ways as part of their management of the right-of-ways. So, hey, that's what they're doing in Canaan with Christian and in Falls Village and so forth. And Salisbury maintains its guardrail fences with herbicides annually. They drive around with a truck with a boom outside, and it just controls the weeds. What else does it say here? Avoid flailing with a mower. So mowing, that's a problem. You can pick it up on the mower deck and move it down the road. That Cornwall project that we looked at that was partially mowed probably was that long, because every year it got mowed. It moved its fragments down further, so it kept expanding. So keep your equipment clean. It's called sanitation. Flag patches, that's a good idea. Don't mow them, then let's leave them and then spray them. Line of sight, you sometimes have to mow because that's a safety issue. Yeah, clean the mower deck. Timing of treatment, late August, September, July, August, September. Avoid the blossom period. If you mow, you don't have the blossoms. You really should get a high kill rate. I mean, we got nearly 99% when Bob Gambino did that project in Cornwall. Really 1 or 2, 5 or 10%, a few fragments here and there. Second year, you're getting high. Third year, you should really be close to 0. But then you need to pay attention to that site for several years thereafterwards, because if you've got big rhizomes in there, there's just enough energy in there. It might take a few years to shoot something up. So ground cover, naturalize, okay, that's a monitor for 3 to 5 years. So, you know, hey, this is the dead knotweed, and then this is afterwards. There's that dead knotweed, and that was that afterwards. So it is feasible thing. Okay, we had a bunch of people helping us with this project, various organizations, Land Trust, Bob Gambino and Christian Allen, both river commissioners in the Housatonic Valley. Then we also have, we didn't make it up, by the way, all by ourselves. We actually have science advisors, including Doug Talamy. Hey, we're constantly, I'm constantly emailing these guys, say, hey, what about this and what about that? And, you know, they respond within 24 hours. So we have resource people in Connecticut, at Connecticut Ag Experimental Station, at UConn, and so on and so on. Let's see, we attended the UConn Symposium last October, so it'll occur a year from October again. It's, you know, they have 400 attendees, probably 10 or 12 programs going on simultaneously. You can learn a lot, and you get encouraged by, you know, what people are encountering, and there's everything from aquatic invasives to terrestrial. Take it away, Tom. I should sit down and shut up.
No.
Okay.
Not really. Sally?
The glyphosate that you're using, is it 100% or is it a?
It's in the range of 40 to 50%, roughly speaking. And whereas there are Roundup percentages that range from 18 to 50% as well. That's the most commonly available, but if you're spraying, you do need a surfactant. If you're using the pure glyphosate, you need that Signet plus surfactant, which is what we use. You know, basically, so we're mixing about 2.5 ounces of concentrate to a gallon of water, and then about 1/2 ounce of surfactant Signet to a gallon of water. And for certain plants that have more waxy cuticles on the stem, we might increase the percentage of surfactant, you know, like buckthorn, for example, which is harder to kill. But for certain, most woody plants we're using triclopyr, but not entirely. Barberry, we use glyphosate, and quite honestly, you can kill barberry with 1% glyphosate. I've done it. It's the difference between 1 and 2 is almost negligible. In fact, that first Washini project treating resprouts of bittersweet, we used 1% triclopyr instead of 2%, because the difference was almost negligible based on tests that were done by Connecticut College and Nature Conservancy. So for certain projects, you know, we're really trying to minimize the chemical component, not eliminate it, but use it most judiciously. And after I gave a talk 5 weeks ago at the Sharon Land Trust, and I got a call back that evening from someone who was a real glyphosate skeptic and said, I convinced her that this was the way to go. And I was, and it was partly because I was stressing spot spraying, judicious use of the herbicides. It's not just a casual, quick, get in there and do it as fast as you can kind of thing. It's actually, hey, you know, we want to kill that plant. We don't want to kill that plant. So we're walking around it and spraying at it. I have 60 acres of my own land that I'm managing with the help of a couple of assistants for a couple hours a week now and then. And we're pushing back the invasives. I'm protecting the whole of what's called Rattlesnake Hill. It's 300 acres. And I've almost got it as
days of freeze. Like, it's the same woods of my youth. When I was a Boy Scout hiking those woods, we weren't tripping over bittersweet pines, and we weren't blocked in our vista. Should I go on? I'm getting excited about some of my other invasive successes. You know, as I brought up in the Sharon Land Trust, where we've been battling bittersweet for 2 years, now we have changed the aesthetics of the landscape. We can now, visual penetration, we can see stuff. We have a 96-foot tall American elm that used to be draped in vines and is now a notable tree. We even uncovered the state champion wild apple tree. And so there's, you know, nature is, the pre-invasive nature is still underneath there in some places and is begging for liberation. So there's so much work to do, but that's a project I can send you a video of at some point, because that may apply more to land trusts than to conservation commissions. I'm not sure how that breaks down, but we've had some good success stories.
Are you taking this presentation and will it be on the internet for other people to watch later?
Yes.
Oh, great.
It's on the Town of Winchester YouTube site.
Okay.
And you can link to that at the bottom of the Town of Winchester website page. There's 6 social media links. One of them is YouTube. It goes right to the YouTube page. There will probably be several different presentations because the Board of Selectmen and meetings are also taped and
So you have to get into it through the Town of Winchester's website? Or can you
No,
just go to YouTube and?
I can't remember the exact.
And you go to YouTube and
You could go to-
search
yes.
for Town of Winchester?
Town of Winchester,
Okay.
correct, yeah.
And you don't have to do any sort of logging in or anything? Okay.
Could
Joyce?
you repeat the name of the state worker who does spraying?
I have to put my hearing aids in, or you gotta talk up.
Repeat the name of the state worker who comes and does spraying? Which
Oh,
is-
yeah. So District 4, which is headquartered in Thomaston, of the Connecticut DOT, covers this area. And it's Steve Geddes, and I can send you his contact information. And he's responsive. You know, he's got a lot on his mind. He's the guy who's marking all those ash trees that are gonna need to be removed before they crash on your car. And, you know, it's, I call him once a year, I try to remind him to do some follow-up. We gotta get him on Green Acres back again. And, I guess from the Housatonic River Commission point of view, yeah, we need to be thinking of the Housatonic and protecting it, and we try to focus on those areas where the knotweed is in the vicinity, or usually it's, you know, it's a tributary going in, or it's a, it's on, you know, think of Route 7 and the river, they basically parallel each other. So, and then wherever there's a crossing, usually there's knotweed, so it gets very precarious. Okay, other questions? Are we,
Do we, oh, sorry.
I've got knotweed obviously on my property, and I put it out by hand. And I've had, and I've been, to your point, putting it in a pile. And I'm wondering if I open the burn.
Yeah, you could burn it. You know, if it's dry as kindling should be,
Right.
it's dead.
Right.
Yeah, you don't need to burn it. But you could just leave it on, out in the sun and on a tarp or something and let it dry out over the summer. It's not gonna regenerate if it doesn't get moisture and it's in contact with soil. But you know, you can just observe it. It's not,
Yeah.
you just don't want it to
The reroute.
reroot, yeah.
Okay.
There's someone
I was confused. Earlier, I thought you said you used 50% glyphosate in something?
When we do cut and treat of woody stems,
Okay.
using a buckthorn blaster, which is a felt tip applicator,
Yeah.
we use undiluted glyphosate and without a surfactant, but this is not the subject of this talk, but I digress. But hey, you cut the stem, here's what we do when we encounter bittersweet. And we cut vines up to 9 inches in diameter. Christian counted back to 1945 in the annual rings. So, hey, the Truman administration, might have even been FDR. But, you know, so normally you're cutting 1/2 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch. 4 inches normally 40 years old, incidentally, from our examples of annual ring counts. We cut it at breast height, so we know it's cut when it's hanging there. Then we cut it at waist height, and then we get down and cut it at ankle height, and then we apply the glyphosate to the base cut, and we kill the roots. So that way, otherwise, a root like this is gonna re-erupt as 10 or 12 or 17 roots, re-sprouting from the stem sides. So you have to kill the roots. Otherwise, you're gonna repeat that cycle endlessly. You know, and this is one of the great things about the Sharon Land Trust. They really embrace that method. And I guess this is worth mentioning. If you're a member of a land trust, you have the right to use an herbicide under their supervision, because by membership and being in the land trust, you are in a sense part owner. And so we have 6, 7, 8 volunteers showing up twice a month at various sites. They do different projects. I'm always on the invasive site at Hamlin Preserve. And man, they're dedicated. They come with their loppers. We give them the buckthorn blaster. They're cutting and treating. You know, we saved hundreds of trees that way on that site. By the time we started doing it, Bittersweet had already been responsible for killing 150 mature trees. So we had a collapsed forest. This was serious full biological potential of bittersweet, which is the tree killing vine. The more of them you can kill, the more trees you will save. And in certain areas, I do observe it's going to be a losing battle, and it's going to end up being a collapsed forest of ash trees that were wrapped in bittersweet, and it will be a perpetual tangle of oriental bittersweet. The problem with it is they produce seeds which birds avoid elsewhere. So the long term, wow, I hope, I don't know if anybody has speculated on New England forest landscapes in 100 years. I know. Billy Gridley has got some of the more isolated forests with the fewest number of oriental bittersweet or other invasives. 0 has got to be your favorite number. That's got to be part of your motto. You know, he's close enough. He could achieve 0. Really, and Christian and I have come to the conclusion that it is our favorite number. And what's wonderful about it is you're down there at early detection and rapid response, which is so easy. You have your blaster on you, or you flag it with tape, and then you come back and you deal with it, and you're back to 0. You don't have exponential. You're not into the 10 to 100 to 1,000 exponentials.
Is it edible? Is it edible?
Yes.
Charlie,
Yes, it is, Japanese knotweed, absolutely.
Knotweed can be eaten. I've even been served it in Canaan. I didn't find it comparable to rhubarb by any means. I guess I would say, if you went out to the Welcome to Winston sign and picked the youngest sprots that were probably about this high, you could probably fashion them up with some sugar and some kind of concoction. They're pretty tart.
They are high in resveratrol, which is an antioxidant. And I've even been told by some people who eat rhubarb capsules for the resveratrol that, you know, he was opposed to what I was doing. Because he considered it to be a good plant. Now, there's more than enough to go around. Yeah, we're not gonna eat our way out of this problem.
Tom, to build on the two questions that were just asked, the first one about the concentration of glyphosate. So it was asked about using the pure formulation of Aquanine in an application for knotweed. And there's one application type there that's appropriate, and that's injection.
Yeah.
So wanted to make sure that that point was made. And that injector gun that was shown in the presentation is automatically calibrated to shoot the maximum allowed amount of herbicide into the stalk, which is 5 milliliters. And then with the point about edibility of knotweed, other invasive plants are edible too, like garlic mustard. The phytoabsorption of knotweed has not been well studied, but garlic mustard actively absorbs lead in the soil. So the garlic mustard along our roadside is actively absorbing the lead particles that were emitted by cars and trucks before leaded gasoline was made illegal. So I would not trust eating invasive plants on the side of the road.
That's probably not a bad idea.
Where does one purchase, either a homeowner or a land trust individual purchase the glyphosate?
Well, you can buy it online. The commercial size is 2.5 gallons. That will last the Norfolk Land Trust indefinitely. Might not be a bad investment though. It's, you know, about $100 or something.
Yeah, 150.
Yeah,
2.5 gallons, so that'll last you a long time.
And but there are smaller quantities in some of the chemistry out there, but you want something that is wetlands approved, which is to say, Aquanine. What are the other names of the wetlands approved? I don't remember.
Well,
There are several of them.
there's several, but there's another herbicide which is not to be used for knotweed, but it's a very important tool in invasive plant management called Garlon 3A, which is triclopyr, and that specific herbicide is also wetlands approved for other broadly invasive plants.
Yeah.
One thing to keep in mind too, if you're professionally, what invasive plant managers typically do is mix a 25-gallon tank. So if you buy a 2.5-gallon jug of concentrate, you use about a half gallon per 25 gallons of spray mixture. So if you were to buy, if a land trust were to buy a 2.5-gallon container of Aquanine glyphosate, you would, and use it in a tank professionally, as an applicator would, you have about 5 tanks there. And you could get a lot done with that.
Yeah. It seems to have a pretty good shelf life, as a matter of fact, so you don't have to use it all at the same time. Or maybe we split one or something. Yeah, actually, didn't we do something like that? Yeah, we share our chemistry. Yeah.
Have you
Suzanne.
heard anything about foam herbicides? Because I was at a presentation and somebody who had been dealing with knotweed said they hadn't used it, but they'd heard there is a foam which really sticks, so it really sticks to the leaf and it doesn't drip or get on any other plants. I wondered if you'd heard of that.
I have heard of it. I've never used it. I don't recall. There was one of the proposals for Sonic Meadows was for that method, but it was a bad proposal actually. No, I don't know.
I could build on that just
Yeah.
a little bit. The foaming agent, which is a surfactant similar to what we use, makes the equipment gum up, like sticks inside the equipment and coagulates the herbicide. So it's not the greatest thing, but for small applications, it's nice.
All right, so any other last questions? Yeah?
For bittersweet, what time of year do you suggest
Oh,
cutting
good
it?
question.
And do you leave the vines where they are? Do you have? to
Yeah,
let-
we leave the vines where they are. We did some bittersweet treatment about a month ago at Sharon Land Trust, because we were trying to get ahead of its leafing out. So bittersweet vine is like a hose of you know, it's bringing the nutrients and the water up to the top, sometimes 90 feet tall. So once the foliage starts to emerge, there's too much vascular flow upward. So we don't, if you treat the stem, it's just being pushed off the top of the cut. It doesn't descend into the roots where you want it. So if you're really early in the, like in the March, early April period, you can still do that. Last year, my assistant said, "Oh, Tom, it's beating." You know, hey, we were out in the field, and we could see the little bubbles of sap coming up. So we quit. And then you resume after about mid-July. And you can resume with a vengeance at that time, because if you cut in mid-July, there will be no fruit formation in the top of the vine that year. If you cut up until, let's say, early August, and because what's sad is, you know, when you're cutting and treating in September, October, the fruit is already up there, and it's viable, and it's going to descend. So, hey, it's better to kill the plant and so forth and so on, but boy, there are certain months where you really want to focus on a particular act and a particular invasive, and July is really a good month to focus on bittersweet cutting and treating. One of the things we're going to be doing, the same is true of glossy buckthorn. The interesting thing about it is there's male plants and female plants. So if you know which is which, and if you see them the year before, and you flag with your pink flagging, all the female plants that have fruit on them, you know you prioritize to get those cut and treated. But there's a gap, just like bittersweet, where you want to cease the treatment from about what starts to leaf out till about early to mid-July, something like that. So there's just too much upward vascular flow. True of multiflora rose as well.
Euonymus? What about winged euonymus? Winged euonymus.
Burning
Burning
bush.
bush. Burning bush.
She's wondering about
Burning bush. When would you?
I would say that's not so much an upward vascular flow issue. Yeah, I think you could probably cut and treat that pretty much anytime during the growing season. The general recommendation is it's best in the fall when the nutrients are returning to probably most effective. What else to say about cutting and treating? Yeah, the fragments of the vines are not a problem. You don't want to pull them out of the tree. You're just going to damage the branches. They're very lightweight wood. They're not dense at all. They will rot fairly soon, and they'll gradually fall out. Yeah.
Yeah, to build on that a little more, you know, one of the things with invasive management is prioritizing your species. So if you're dealing with knotweed and you're dealing with burning bush, and you realize that both, you know, the best time to apply for both is in the fall, odds are you should deal with the knotweed first before dealing with the burning bush. You could cut burning bush just as effectively in November than you can in September. But that window for knotweed is only 8 to 10 weeks long. Some seasons it's as short as 6 weeks long. So, depending on where the frost is. So, when you're managing invasives, you just really have to focus on your priorities and timing.
Yeah, that's a good point. We usually try to wrap up with a cut and treat by November, by Thanksgiving, let's say. It's somewhat better, more effective in October than it is in November. Yeah, knotweed, that's a good point. There's a very precise cutoff. And you never know when it's going to be the end of September or later into October. It's called the killing frost. And once that happens, there's it's not gonna absorb any chemistry and take it down. It's just too late. And that becomes a balancing act around that time of the year. And it's one of the variables, such as rain is with treating knotweed, you don't have a wide window, as Christian was saying.
When is the window for spraying knotweed?
Some people do it as early as the beginning of July. I would say it's better in the middle to late July, early August. Then if it's got going into blossom, you hold off while it's in blossom. And blossoms tend to drag out when it's a warmer weather in the fall, and you're up to mid-September. When we did that demonstration on September 19th for the Falls Village for the town cruise, I thought that was probably going to be good enough, but the blossoms were still there, so we demonstrated spraying with just water, because there's still insect activity.
So after it finishes blossoming, but before the frost?
Yeah,
Is that-
after
then you
after
have another
blossom until
opportunity?
frost, and then July until blossom.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that sound good?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. I would like to mention that the Winchester Conservation, the Winchester Conservation Commission actually has started a project in an application.
Hey, heads up here.
Called iNaturalist, where we are trying to map Japanese knotweed in our area, particularly along the road, so that the DPW crews can deal with it. So anybody who's interested in that, we can probably get you some information, or if you want to come to one of our meetings are always on the first Tuesday of the month. They're usually at 5 o'clock, not at 7 o'clock.
Oh, great.
But right here in this room,
Okay, first Tuesday of the month. Great, what time?
5 p.m.
Oh, 5, you just said first Tuesday. Great. Thank you. That's great.
And I know he used to have a house on there.